So, man, we're getting real close to the start of the regular season. I mean, we've gotten through all the preseason games. We've gotten through all of training camp, all of free agency, OTAs, the draft, all of that. And now we're finally at the point to where the initial 53-man roster is out. We're going to go over it, look at some things. Are there any surprises? Before I do that, I want to make sure I give a shout out down below to the dog check tier people. If you want your name to show up at the bottom of the screen on the video, please make sure you hit that link, that Patreon link down below, and join the Patreon so you can have your name added to this list. But with all that being said, also don't forget to subscribe so you can check out my live streams. You know, I got to plug everything. All right, so now let's talk about this offense and who they kept. We're going to start there. Not a lot of surprises here. Jacoby Brissette, Josh Dobbs, kind of assumed that. I thought there was a possibility that the Browns could keep a third quarterback, right? And the thinking behind a third quarterback would be this. Let's say you want Josh Dobbs to run some packages in these games that Jacoby Brissette starts. If that is the case, I would assume that you would want to bring in a third quarterback just to be safe. That still could happen. Again, this is just the initial 53 as the weeks go on. And honestly, until we get to like Saturday, we're not going to know really who's actually going to be on the game day 53. But that's something to look out for because, again, if they plan on using Josh Dobbs in any other capacity other than a reserve quarterback, then you would want to keep an extra quarterback on the roster, on the active roster. So that's something that's interesting here. Look, the running back room being as full as the wide receiving room, that's only happening here. For good reason. I mean, none of these guys are bad players. So Nick Chubb, Demetric Felton, Jerome Ford, Kareem Hunt, Dearness Johnson, and what makes up to be the deepest running back room in football. Again, here, it's going to be Chubb and Hunt. Jerome Ford might factor in a little bit on kick returns. And then there's Demetric, who's going to return punts, and Dearness, who's probably going to be first guy up if either Hunt or Chubb goes down, especially if Chubb goes down. I think Dearness goes right in with Hunt supplementing. And I think if Hunt goes down, I actually think Jerome Ford's going to be first in, right? So I think it's almost like there's two different running back positions when you look at it. Because they're not keeping the fullback anymore, so that extra roster spot went to another running back. But also, you know, in terms of okay, certain running backs will be good fits to replace other running backs, but might not be great fits to replace running backs as a whole, right? So, you know, you don't necessarily want to roll out Nick Chubb and Dearness Johnson. You want to do Dearness Johnson or Nick Chubb, and and Kareem Hunt or Jerome Ford, if that makes sense, right? Because you want to make sure you have that contrast of styles when you move up in the depth chart. So, you know, I think both of those players are really the third running back, depending on who's available, right? And that's gonna fluctuate based on who's hurt. Because I think Dearness is a good replacement for Nick Chubb. I think Jerome Ford's a good replacement for Kareem Hunt if you can't have those players. Obviously, you would rather have Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Wide receivers, and Demetric Felton's really a wide receiver. So he's a sixth wide receiver in this conversation, but they're keeping David Bell, Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Anthony Schwartz, and Michael Woods. Michael Woods is a bit of a surprise here because I thought he was going to be on IR. He's not. It turns out he'll be all right. Interested to see if he plays at all. Again, it's been said, this room's not super deep, right? Amari Cooper and then a bunch of unproven guys, right? And then there's Anthony Schwartz on top of that. So not the deepest room in the world. We know it's not the deepest room in the world. I don't think it's the biggest problem in the world, but I do think it's a little bit of a concern. Then we go to tight ends here. Kind of a surprise they're only keeping two here, given that this team kept like 4 tight ends the last couple of years. But Harrison Bryant, David Njoku, hey, man, they're just trimming the fat, right? I can appreciate that. Why even mess around and act like you're going to need a third tight end when those are going to be the two guys that you're going to target in this offense? This also signifies a shift from 13 personnel to 12 personnel, and they're going to be 12 heavy. That's what I think that's going to signify. And what I mean by 13 and 12, the way personnel packages go in football, for those of you who aren't familiar, when you hear somebody say 11 personnel, 12 personnel, 13 personnel, 22 personnel, that's referring to what players are going to be on the field. The way you figure that out is you have the 5 down linemen every play plus a quarterback. So that's 6 guys. So the other numbers are trying to account for the other players, right, that add up to 11. So 11 personnel would be 1 running back, 1 tight end, and then obviously the rest of those numbers are receivers. So, that would be 3 wide receivers, and then obviously it goes on and on, right? So we can have 12 personnel, which is 1 running back, 2 tight ends, 13, 1 running back, 3 tight ends, 22, 2 running backs, 2 tight ends, right? So that's just kind of how that personnel packaging works. So whenever you hear somebody say 11, 12, 13 personnel, that's what they're referring to, is the number of running backs and tight ends on the field per play. So that's how that works for anybody who has the questions. Offensive line, look, they kept all their starters. There's no surprise here. Joe Bitonio, Jack Conklin, Jedrick Wills, Wyatt Teller, and Ethan Ponick. Obviously, Nick Harris is going to be on IR. And they kept Drew Forbes, which is a surprise to me, Michael Dunn, which is not Chris Hubbard, which is not James Hudson, which was a lock, and Freeholt, which is another surprise. So, again, tremendous depth in that room. I'm not concerned about who they don't and do keep in that room because it's a deep room. It is a really, really deep room. Let's talk about the defensive side of the ball here. And on the defensive line, I don't think there's any surprises here because there's nobody that made the team that I didn't expect to make the team here. Taven Bryant, Jadeveon Clowney, Jordan Elliott, Myles Garrett, Isaac Rochelle, Isaiah Thomas, Tommy Togiai, Chase Winovich, Perion Winfrey, Alex Wright. So of that group, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these guys are edge rushers. Well, no, 6 of these guys are edge rushers. So they kept 6 edge, and then 1, 2, 3, just 4 DTs, which makes sense given their personnel. So all in all, just about 10 defensive linemen throughout. I think this is interesting here because if you're keeping 10 on the initial, I would keep my eyes out for Isaac Rochelle, Isaiah Thomas, Chase Winovich. I think it is possible if the Browns want to upgrade through waivers. Those are one of the guys that can be gone. And again, this is the initial 53. At least a handful of these guys that made the initial 53 are probably going to get released in pursuit of a waiver claim or a switch due to game plan or something like that. But so take the initial 53 with a little bit of a grain of salt. But that's the D-tackle room. Look, we've talked ad nauseum all offseason about, where we feel like the faults are on the defensive line. I will say this. After training camp, I feel much better about certain aspects of it. Jordan Elliott makes me feel good. Alex Wright made me feel good. I know Jadeveon and Myles, those guys are going to be good. So you got 3 edges that I feel good about, plus a tackle. Taven Bryant, I feel like he's okay. Right? So I feel better about it after the preseason than I felt coming into the preseason. I don't feel where I felt like I wanted to be with this defensive line, but I do feel better about it than I did coming in. Let's talk about linebackers. Tony Fields, Jordan Kay, JOK, Jacob Phillips, Sione Takitaki, Anthony Walker. I think the only surprise here is Jordan had a strong preseason. Think he's going to factor in as a special teams guy. Made some plays. I think he got a couple tackles for losses in the last 2 preseason games. He really shined in the fourth quarter. Again, him, DeAnthony Bell, I think are probably going to be the core of the defensive side of special teams. I like that. I think they showed a lot in preseason to earn that spot here. So, again, he's another guy that could be cut, but I think he's probably important on special teams. I think he's safer than people assume. Cornerbacks here, we're going to talk about Martin Emerson, AJ Green, Greg Newsome, Denzel Ward, Greedy Williams. I guess Martin Emerson's the 5th DB in that conversation. And I mean, that's a deep room, right? When you go 5 deep there, and you're not necessarily worried about any of those guys touching the field. And then when it comes to safety, D'Anthony Bell, Grant Delpit, Ronnie Harrison, John Johnson, Richard LeCounte, like all 10 of those guys, I feel good about being on the field, right? And there were times where we weren't even feeling good about the starting safety being on the field for this team. So I feel pretty good with that safety in DB room. It is deep, it is strong, and it's young. It's very young too. That's another thing to point out. So youth in that room too. I think there's really no surprises. I think these are all the 10 people that I thought would make the team from that side, that part of the defense. Now let's talk about special teams. Again, no surprises here. Cade York, Corey Bojo, and then Charlie Hewitt. So they keep Bojo. They got Cade York, Charlie Hewitt. Again, no surprises there. That's the 53. Again, things are going to change. Maybe they add another tight end. Maybe they add another wide receiver. I think that's really all they will add, or maybe a quarterback too. I think maybe those 3 spots they add, then that would leave 3 people off. I think the first 3 people off the boat would probably be Rochelle. Yeah, Rochelle, maybe Winovich, and one of the offensive linemen. I think those are probably like one of the first 3 guys off the boat because, or maybe they trade Dearness. That could factor in. But there's probably going to be moves made, adjustments made before the season starts. And stay tuned here. Make sure you subscribe to get the update when that does happen. But y'all have a great day. Have a good night.